Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders. We meet each one to one. I'm pleased to welcome Vy Higginsen, founder and executive director of the Mama Foundation for the Arts. Her Harlem brownstone is bursting at the seams, with teenagers expressing themselves through music and theater. And this is just one part of her distinguished and remarkable career. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Vi, you are a child of Harlem. You were born there. You live and teach there now. But your family moved away to the Bronx. You basically grew up in the Bronx, although your father was a minister of a church in Harlem. Tell me what it was like for you growing up between the Bronx and Harlem.
Well, we never really left Harlem. My grandmother lived in Harlem, and my grandmother and my mother had a real estate business. So we were always, even though we lived in the Bronx or slept in the Bronx, we were always back and forth between the Bronx and Harlem. And so that connection was always made because my grandmother lived most of her adult life at 113 West 126th Street. And she lived till 97.
Wow.
And so we were always, you know, sort of back and forth in between both. So I have that, both experiences, if you will.
What were your sources of inspiration growing up?
Well, now, I would say that my mother was a big source of inspiration, but also my oldest sister.
Now, did your mother work, or was she a housewife? Or?
My mother worked in real estate.
Okay, okay.
And I was the youngest of 4 children, so I got to spend a lot of time with her. I think I was a bit of a surprise. So where she went, I went. And as the first lady of the church, she did a lot of work, you know, raising funds and cake sales and bake sales and mistress of ceremonies at churches and fundraisers and etc. And I got a chance to watch her in action. My oldest sister, Doris Troy, was the first to sing in the church choir. But we live on 126th Street, so we are a half a block from the Apollo Theater. So after my father died, my sister was excited about the music of that day. And my mother, of course, wanted to keep us all in the church, but my sister was curious about the music from the Apollo. And so therefore she snuck out, and she got a job at the Apollo as an usherette. And she got to see some of the greats of that day. And then, of course, she wanted to sing.
Right, right.
And so that's the basis of the story, coming from Harlem on 126th Street, and how she went from the church to the stages, and then ultimately world stages.
Right. How did you find your professional calling? And there were a lot of them. I mean, you've had a lot of firsts. You were the first black female radio personality in prime time in New York City, the first woman to host a morning show on New York radio, the first woman in advertising sales at Ebony Magazine, the first black woman to produce a drama on Broadway, which was Joe Turner's Come and Gone by the late August Wilson. Where did all this come from, and where did you acquire the fearlessness to go where few women and probably no black women had gone before?
I don't know.
Short answer.
I really don't know. What I do know is that I was curious. I was curious about everything. I thought I wanted to be in the fashion industry, which is where it started for me. And my sister would always tell me to talk whenever I was, she'd say, talk, just say anything. And she said, I just like the sound of your voice. And so I went to broadcasting school, and I came up with a tape. I wanted to do what you do. I wanted to do programming, specifically fashion and beauty for women. for Black women in particular and all women in general. And so I created the format for this using my fashion background. I graduated from the Fashion Institute of Technology, which was a great creative experience for me. And that's what started. I made this tape and I took it to a man who was the program director at a brand new radio station, which was called WLIB FM, which was a half a block in the other direction from 126th Street. Many people don't know that. WLIB AM and FM was on Lenox Avenue and 126th Street before it moved downtown.
Okay, so that's where your radio career began.
That's where radio began.
And what kind of show did you have?
I was a radio personality, a disc jockey. I played music. It was a total Black experience in sound, different shades of music, which come back now to this day, my love of music.
Right.
But I went to work at Ebony magazine in the fashion division of sales. And that's where I became an expert on the Black consumer market. You know, the buying power and the demographics and the psychographics of this community was exciting to me. And we were able to document the purchasing power. And I know that audience was particularly powerful spenders.
Now, were you working for Ebony in New York or in Chicago?
In New York City.
Okay, okay.
And I got the opportunity to sit at the foot of the masters. I sat at the foot of John H. Johnson when he was alive. And they really taught us about our community and our power.
Now tell me about Mama, I Want to Sing, which you're probably best known for, and how it evolved.
Well, now, when I first graduated from college, my sister took me on tour with her. My sister's name is Doris Troy, and she sang a song called Just One Look. And that song became a pop soul classic. She left the United States and went to England, London, where she worked with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and toured throughout all of Europe. Well, when I graduated from college, she took me with her. And on those trips, she began to tell me stories about our family and who we were, where she came from, and how she felt about my father dying, and, you know, the music that surrounded our family. And I was intrigued by hearing this because my father had died at an early age. So Mama, I Want to Sing really comes out of the history of our family and the discussions that I had early on in Europe.
Right.
And with my sister. So that was the beginning. And I saw her do things that I had never seen a Black woman ever do.
For example?
She hired musicians. She produced her own recordings. She organized her own concerts. She was a leader. And she was a leader in the arts and in music, and people loved her. And she organized the background music for many of the great entertainers today that include, you know, she was on the Apple label with the Beatles. She was a producer for them. So she was the first sight of a producer I saw.
Now, like many Black singers, I gather she learned to sing in church.
She learned
and then
to sing
took it into the popular
Yes,
mode.
she did. Yeah.
Right. Now, was your mother in favor of this career?
Oh, well, no. No. I mean, you kidding? I mean, especially during that time. And now we're talking about the 50s and the 60s. And you know, the idea was to keep your family unit together and to stay in the church. But that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
I mean, sooner or later, my mother had no choice. She had to let her go because she then was of age.
Right.
She could go, and so then, but as it turned out, you know, things didn't turn out too bad after all.
So how did you put this musical together?
Well, that happened really strangely because I was publishing a magazine called Unique New York Magazine. I was doing a television interview show, and I met a gentleman. The show was about living single, and he wrote the book, and then we fell into step and started talking after this television show. And I began telling him the story I'm telling you.
Right.
That I got to travel and see the world and hear the music. And he said, wow, that's a great story. You need to write that down. And I said, I don't know how to do that. He said, I will help you. And he and I, for just fun, my best friend began writing down this story. And the title, Mama, I Want to Sing, came, and then we started writing lyrics, something I didn't know we could do or knew how to do. And then the next thing you know, we had a script. Mm-hmm. And that best friend became my husband and the father of our daughter. And we were off and running. I took that script to the only person I knew, which was Rosetta Lemoire at the Amos Repertory Theater. And she said, I want to do this. Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of Mama, I Want to Sing.
And it wound up, my understanding, it ran for more than 2,000 performances between 1983 and 85. Mm-hmm. And it performed not just here, but in London and Japan.
Yes.
Why do you think it resonated so well with so many people?
Well, I think it was a combination of things. The right time, the right music, the right message. It was about family, faith, love, and music. And yes, I'm happy to say that this phase of African American theater started here in New York City when audiences began to show up mm-hmm. in large numbers.
Right.
And therefore, I would have to say that everything that happened in black theater after that was a result of the initiation of Mama, I Want to Sing.
Okay.
Including the Tyler, excuse me, including the Tyler Perry series and all the rest of the series that came after.
Okay.
And New York should take a bow for that because it changed the course of African American theater.
Okay. And the aftermath of Mama, I Want to Sing was the Mama Foundation for the Arts, obviously.
Yes.
Tell me about that, what that is.
Well, after we had accumulated this knowledge base and blazed this trail, not only 8 years in New York City, but then 2.5 years on the road, and then Europe and Japan, and ultimately on the West End of London, it seemed only appropriate that this legacy continued. And what we discovered over time is that as we continued to audition for Mama, I Want to Sing, the young people coming in could not sing a whole gospel song all the way through. They didn't know Amazing Grace. They didn't know Precious Lord. Music and time had changed. Mm-hmm. And we felt that it was important that we give something back to the community. And we wanted to build an institution that would allow us to pass the music on from generation to generation so that the music never died.
Okay.
And we wanted to create an institution that would help us to restore Harlem to its prominence as an entertainment capital in the world, so that people from all over the world could come and sample our music and our food, our art, and our culture. So that was the feeling and the passion behind starting the Mama Foundation for the Arts.
We're going to pick up on that. Hold that thought while we take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Vy Higginsen after the following messages.
Sounds like you could use some Van Gogurt. It's fortified with arts-rich nutrients to improve your math and reading skills. Catch!
Van Gogurt. Thanks. So what's the deal with your ear?
Always with the ear, huh?
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit americansforthearts.org.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Vy Higginsen, the founder and executive director of the Mama Foundation for the Arts. There are other performing arts programs in Harlem. Mm-hmm. What makes the Mama Foundation different?
Well, we focused on teens between 13 and 19 years old. And what we do is we want to provide them with what they are not getting in school. We see ourselves as a bridge between school, church, and home. We wanted the musical students. And we felt that we can teach, train, and employ talented young people in the arts. We teach breathing, harmony, pitch, and control. But we teach them who they are and where they come from in music. And we use gospel and jazz and R&B arts. The Mama Foundation is, in fact, the school of the gospel, jazz, and R&B arts. And we think we're one of the only schools of its kind in America.
So this is is this just an after school and weekend kind of program?
It is a Saturday program.
Okay, okay.
And they enter through the audition process, and they attend free of charge. There's no cost.
Wow.
We insist that it be free to the students so that there would be no economic discrimination.
So, and how many students you have at a particular point in time?
Well, there is a total of about 175 students, and we have to turn students away often. We need more space, and we need, more places for young people. But they get to sit at the foot of the masters. They get to learn both gospel, traditional gospel, hymns, contemporary gospel. They learn all of it. And that's what they are taught from these masters. And they learn how to use their voice. But more importantly, we teach them how to find their own voice. Because we tell them that they can learn how to sing somebody else's song, but they need to make sounds that come from them.
Now, I hear Sissy Houston works with your school.
Yes, Sissy Houston and my sister Doris Choi worked together in the early days of Atlantic Records. And we are good friends, and I wanted her style of music to have an impact on these young people.
Now, she was a gospel singer, right?
Sissy Houston was actually both. She was very famous for the Drink Art Singers.
Okay.
Their family, and they travel all over in the early, but of course, Sissy Houston also sang with Aretha Franklin and Elvis Presley and some of the great singers of all times, as well as her own group of the Sweet Inspirations. And they backed up many a great star.
So does she actually teach at the school?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Now, 170 students, that's a whole lot of students to teach.
Not all at once.
Okay.
They come through a process. The beginners, the advanced, and the performing before live audiences.
How young do they come to you?
13.
Okay, okay, okay. No
13.
7-year-olds.
Not yet.
How's it funded? Where does the money come from all of this?
Through generous donations from individuals, from corporate sources, from grants like Chase Manhattan Bank and Con Edison, Time Warner, companies like that who support the idea of hearing the musical students so that they don't get lost.
Right.
We think that there's a difference sometime between the musical students and the science and math students. But when the musical students' needs are met, they become better math and science students.
Tell me about the children at the school.
We have a wide variety. The thing that excites me every Saturday is seeing their faces and their eagerness to learn. They're sitting on the edge of their seats. We believe that music has a very therapeutic quality. And if there is any issue that is outstanding, and anxiety, depression, or, fears of any kind, music has a way of dealing with those issues. And so when they come inside our building, they feel safe and they feel like this is their time. It's for them. It's all about them. So it's an excitement in the air as they're learning and performing. And we choose the kind of songs that help exercise their vocal cords.
Now, when they come in for an audition, what are you looking for?
That they can carry a tune.
Well,
we don't expect perfection. We don't expect any of that. We only really expect that they are able to, that they are in fact musical. And then therefore we can develop, nourish, and encourage them.
right. Do you also have classes for adults, or is it primary for
We have,
for young
you know,
people?
we do have classes for adults. We have classes, we have jazz workshops, we have gospel workshops, we have individual classes for people who want to just get lessons, vocal lessons for the masters, yes. So we are a musical institution.
Now, I assume that your students perform concerts. Is there some outlets for them to perform?
Yes, they become just the musical darlings here in the city. And they've performed at any number of areas, like the American Museum of Natural History, the Mayor's Interfaith Breakfast, the New York Historical Society, for example, at the Apollo Theater, coming up with Carnegie Hall in association with Carnegie Hall and Jesse Norman, that there's a big event coming up.
Oh, really?
Apollo,
are they singing?
and they will be singing at that event. And so they've been, and they will be the opening act in our new show called Sing Harlem Sing. So they'll get this opportunity to perform with the adults.
Well, let's talk about that show, which is debuting in April at the Dempsey Theater on West 127th Street. Tell me about that show.
Well, this show, Sing Harlem Sing, is a show that combines the music from the church and the music from the radio. In the time that I spent on the radio, I got music that I just absolutely love. So this is really kind of like my story from the radio, that I get a chance to say it's the 50th anniversary of this radio station in Harlem that's been bringing this music. And today I get to play the stuff I love to play over this time. So we know history of Harlem could be told without the church, and so we go to church and then we take you through music and then back to the church. So we cover a lot of ground musically, and we tell the story.
Do you ever have students? Have you had any of your students who have, since the Apollo Theater is right there, who have performed at the what's called amateur night at the Apollo?
Well, we've had many people who've come out of our Mama Foundation since the beginning, which was way, back in 1983. So at one point, we were the largest employers of black entertainment talent 52 weeks a year than any other company in America.
Really?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so it spawned off a number of young stars that include Tisha Campbell. That was the star of absolutely. She was the first Doris Winter. And then, of course, there was Desiree Coleman Jackson and Deatra Hicks, to name a few, Tony Terry, all of who went on to other musical careers.
So, and I had not heard about the Dempsey Theater. That was new to me.
Well, it's interesting that we were looking for a space. After we left the Heckscher Theater, we were looking for the right space to house the kind of musicals that we do. And then we discovered this building that had a theatrical space inside. It's an office building, and we inquired, and we were told that we could put our new show that just came back from Japan in 22 cities, and put this in this show after we have renovated and fixed it up.
You did the previews in Japan.
We did the previews in Japan.
Right.
But it opened at the Apollo Theater initially, and then went off to Japan for 6 weeks, And now we're back. We're back to Harlem from Japan.
Can you imagine your kids singing for the president, the new president?
I imagine it, yes, I do. From your mouth to God's ears.
To God's ears.
Yeah,
to God's ears.
They're stunning.
I understand that you found a whole new family a few years ago. A white rancher from Missouri, your cousin. How did that come about?
You'd have to think about, yes, indeed. Well, that was very strange. I had been, after my grandmother died, the one that was in Harlem, we found these relatives that came from Virginia that I didn't really know about, and I was so curious. I said, who are these people? And then we had a family reunion. And my cousin James O. West, who was a reverend, an Episcopal priest, and we had this reunion, and he said to me, go find the others. just like that. Go find. And I took him seriously. So I went on this quest for like 25 years. I hired genealogists. I looked for people. I went to Schoenberg. And I couldn't, the last genealogist said, give it up. You will never find any more. And then I thought, well, oh my God. Girlfriend said, why don't you take a DNA test because you said your grandmother was an Indian? And I said, yeah, I took this DNA test. Turned out she wasn't an Indian. And I said, and it turned out that we had 35% European blood and some Asian blood and the rest African American. Now I'm curious, now I think I'm adopted. So I go to my cousin and to give him the test, and he too doesn't know Indian blood.
And who did you ultimately find?
And then ultimately, after the DNA test hit the database, here came a whole family. This African-American family now entered this white family tree. And we found a cattle rancher named Marion West, who called one day and said, my name is Marion West and I understand we're related. And that began a whole new journey. And the reason why we couldn't find the other relatives is they had all moved west to Kentucky, Missouri, Tennessee, etc. And now we've found that connection.
That's fascinating. And we'll have to talk more about your new family in our next interview because we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
But I really want to thank Vy Higginsen of the Mama Foundation for the Arts for joining us. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.